Westlake. It's Richa.
It's Michael.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Dr. Medina over at Gonsalves Elementary. I'm a mental health professional.
Okay.
All right, so for our Avid project, we have a few questions that we wanted to ask for you. And the first one would be, what emotional or behavioral changes do kids usually go through when their parents get divorced?
So there's a variety of emotions that children can typically experience. Some of the ones that we typically see are sadness, anger, feelings of guilt, feeling that responsibility that they were involved in that separation. It varies per children depending on the age and how the family is coping through the separation, as well as like behavioral. In school-age children, we see it typically in changes in their behavior, such as maybe tantrums that are occurring, or children tend to be more desiring more time with either both parents or individual parents. So that fear of like not letting go of mom and not letting go of dad. So more clingy, I would say, with their parents. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so our second question is, at what age do kids seem to be the most affected by divorce, and how is their reaction different depending on how old they are?
Just going based on research and what we typically see, the biggest impact is seen in elementary or early age school-age children, and the reason for that is because during those primary years, that's where a lot of routines and consistency is very essential for the students. So when there's changes or separation within their home environment, there's a lot of confusion, or again, developmentally, depending on their awareness, they might seem very confused about the situation or putting it more on themselves rather than really understanding what's going on. Mm-hmm.
Nice. And the next one was, do kids whose parents are divorced have a harder time in school or making friends on their own?
It varies, but it is shown through many examples. In my experience as a counselor, I've seen it that it does impact sometimes on children. More of like in the social aspect of it. So socially, when there's separations in the family, students feel like they're isolated, or it's only them that are going through these experiences, or even feelings of shame where they would not like to share so much with their peers because they feel like, oh, it's only me that is going through a separation. So sometimes we do see it socially within our children, where they're having that difficult time either creating friendships or more opening up with their own friendship group already about what's going on within their family.
How do you have them like open up to you when they do start talking to you?
It just depends on the relationship that I have with the students, as well as like the communication with the families. Like for example, here at the elementary sites, I am available for all students when situations like this happen. I would say usually how it goes is either if the family brings it up to our attention, then we're able to then make that check-in with the student. A check-in is more of like just a meeting with the student individually, checking in on how they're doing, coping with the separation. Or sometimes the referral comes from the teacher. If the teacher notices changes in the classroom environment, such as like maybe there is changes in the behavior that are being evident in the classroom, maybe there's a lot of conflicts that are arising, or there's a drop in grades. So that's usually like when a check-in is provided to check in on like the emotional part of the situation and see if there's anything that we can provide support in. With regards to how do I allow students, or more like help them open up, it takes time, as well as like the relationship with the adult. Here at school, I am very involved within the students, so they know who I am. I greet them in the morning, I go into the classroom, so they know who Miss Betsy is. So that's how they know me here at school, which is very important, because when situations like this happen, they know, oh, there's someone at school that I can talk to, as well as like whenever things like this happen or other situations like bullying or there's a conflict within maybe at home or things like that, they know, hey, like I can talk to this person, and it's more that trust is already there, so they feel comfortable talking to me.
So our fourth question is, in what ways do kids usually try to cope with family conflicts, and do they benefit them?
It varies when it comes to coping strategies. I would say the biggest one would be the support system. So when there's separation, divorce within the family, oftentimes the support system has a lot to do with it. If there's like maybe older siblings involved or cousins or even friends, they're able to have those conversations and feel connected and supported within their friendship group, as well as I would say like here at school, if they do have connections with adults where they have that ability to talk about what's going on, as well as like if they meet with me, for example, they're able to reflect on what healthy coping strategies they're able to use. Here in elementary, that's the primary year, so it's very important for them to develop different strategies on learning how to cope with their emotions when things come up. So building those healthy coping strategies, and they can be such as like taking deep breaths or being mindful of what they are experiencing so that they can connect it to something that is able to support them to cope through that emotion, like listening to music, going on a walk, or spending time with loved ones.
Have you ever had a kid that just didn't want help? Like, how do you go about that?
Absolutely. I would say like when it comes to our emotions, that's one of the toughest things to open up about, even as adults or even as young adults. That's one of the hardest things to do. But it's just being there for someone and letting them know like, what do you need? Because sometimes like the student just wants to just have that space to just be there and not talk, and it's just being there for someone and letting them know like, hey, I'm here for you. I see that you are going through a big emotion. Let me know what I can do to help. So it's just, again, checking in with the student specifically. What do you need? Definitely not pressuring them to talk, because as we all cope with our emotions in a different way, it's just learning what it is best to help the student so that they, whenever they're ready, they can open up. There has been cases where students emotionally are not open to sharing what it is that they feel, but that's where I connect them to different resources. I let them know like, hey, this is only me that's here as a counselor here at school, but outside of school there is other organizations that are able to provide therapy or counseling, so that they're able to see that resource. Or if maybe right here during elementary, it's not a good time, they're not emotionally and mentally ready to be provided with the support, I do let them know that during middle school and high school, they do have counselors available so that they can get the support there if needed. Such as both of you guys have two mental health professionals there at Cerritos. Yes.
Awesome.
We do work very closely, so we do work together. So when there's resources that are available, we share them with each other, and we try to stay connected like that. Again, like if say there's a sibling here that is attending, and like say you have another sibling that's going to Cerritos, we have that communication so that we're able to support the whole family as a whole.
Do you happen to have a student or an mental health professional like confidentiality, or is it like anything that's said between you and the student? Like, do you tell the parents? Do you tell the teachers, or how does it work?
Yes, so when it comes to counseling services, we are maintaining all of the information confidential. By confidentiality, it means that only the information that is shared within the student and the counselor stays within the same room. It's only for 3 specific reasons where that confidentiality would be broken, and then that information gets disclosed with the families. In those situations, it would be if the student discloses that they want to hurt themselves, if the student discloses that they are in danger, or that someone is hurting them. So if during our session that information gets disclosed, we would then inform the student that in order to ensure the safety of the student and get the support that the student needs, we would have to break that confidentiality to let the families know so that the support is provided. So in those cases, we do share. Typically during counseling services, we do work alongside with the families, but it's more like a summary of like, these are the skills that we're reviewing in session, or these are the topics that we're working on. Or if, like, say for example, the student gives us permission to share certain things, then that's when we share it with the family to ensure that it's something that can be helpful during the counseling process.
And are things like art, journaling, or role-playing good ways for kids to work through their emotions?
Yes, as I was reading through the list there, yes, those are actually some of the coping strategies that a lot of students use, as well as many others. I did provide a list for you guys in the back. It's a list of like different coping strategies.
Oh, wow.
So usually as a counselor, like we just go into the classroom, introduce different coping strategies to students, or even make them aware, giving them that educational piece of like what a coping strategy is and how are they used. But ultimately it's letting the students know, like, you have to find something that helps you, and it can look different for many individuals. Like, for example, one of the common ones that is used in counseling that we usually introduce initially is like taking deep breaths or going on a walk. But sometimes students try it and they say, that doesn't work for me. So I just explain to them, like, you have to try something else. Like, do you like basketball? Do you like running? Do you like listening to music? So it's really just finding something that helps you cope through different emotions. It can be sadness, it can be anger, it can be frustration. Like, maybe for you guys, is there one that you guys have identified as like a way that it's helpful when your emotions are really high?
I think breathing techniques and like to say a slang word, let me read. I'm gonna edit that part out. Something that works for me is like baking, I think, or like cooking, or like eating. I don't know if that's good, but
no, yeah, and it's again just being mindful of like, you know, what works, what doesn't, as well as like you said, like eating, because sometimes food brings us comfort, but it's also like that self-awareness of like that control of like, hey, you know, is it excessively eating? If so, then, you know, like maybe finding different ways. But baking, I believe it's actually one of the ones on there. Yeah. So that's why like we again give the list to the students and let them know like, hey, just try and see what helps. Like for me, for example, I like running. So going out on runs really allows me to just let go of everything that's going on. Like say if I'm feeling stressed or tired or something, but that's again just a healthy outlet, and it's different for everyone. Some people really enjoy listening to music or art. Yeah.
How do you do it when you're tired?
When I'm tired, like they say, it's just being consistent and that determination, at least of like, hey, at least running 1 mile.
Wow.
It's a lot for you.
Yeah, at least.
Alright, then. How can adults teach kids better ways to deal with tough situations at home?
I think the biggest one is really improving the children's self-awareness of how to cope through their emotions. So that's a big one when they're very little. Them being able to identify what each emotion is and how to problem solve and cope through those emotions. Because usually what we see when students are not learning at a very young age how to cope through these things, as they get older, then that's when like there's that gap. And then it's more difficult for them to really identify like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, or even cope with it. Because even as we see like adults, sometimes like when they're feeling very frustrated, sometimes they're not coping in a very healthy way. But it might be because when they were younger, they were not introduced to like healthy ways of coping, or even just being mindful like, hey, it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel sad sometimes, but what's something that can happen so that we can problem solve and for the situation to get better. Mm-hmm.
So you do bring in the parents too, so they get help together?
Yes, well, see, I would say one of the biggest things with school-based counseling is that school-based counseling support is provided here at school, but it's mainly targeting like academic things that are occurring or that it's impacting the student's social emotional wellness like at school. Like for example, if a student is going through a divorce at home and we see the drop in grades, then that's when there's like that consistent interaction with the families to work together to support the student. When, for example, the family is going through separation, but the student is coming to school and it's really not impacting the student here at school, then the most appropriate services for the student would be outside services, more of like a family counseling, or even just individual counseling for the student so that they can be provided with counseling services, but it would be outside of school based on the need. Because if it's really not impacting the student here at school, then that's where we are able to differentiate which one would be best, as well as we want to be mindful of like how the services are also being provided. Here at school, typically counseling is once a week for about 30 minutes. Sometimes the students need more than the 30 minutes or once a week. So that's why there's differences in services, as well as we can, as counselors, make that recommendation of like, hey, it would be best to do outside services, or let's try school-based counseling and then see how it goes. And then different referrals can happen.
Our 8th question is, what's the best advice for parents to help their kids during a divorce?
I would say the biggest one would be being honest and open with the children when a separation or divorce is happening, being mindful of like age appropriate information and how the information is disclosed. Children are very aware of what's happening in their environment, so oftentimes families prefer not to disclose the information, but students are observing all the time, so it's always best for that open communication to be within the children, as well as reassure the children that it's not their fault that the separation happened. Usually students take it very hard on themselves, and then they immediately place the blame on themselves, and then there's that guilt. So it's again just hearing it from their parents, reassuring them that it wasn't their fault that the separation is happening, checking in with them consistently, noticing if there's changes in their behavior or in their emotional wellness, as well as again just being mindful of what's going on and actively listening to see what's going on.
So, how can better communication between parents and schools help kids handle family problems?
Communication is key, I would say, in multiple scenarios when it comes to counseling. It's essential. As I mentioned earlier, like if a family is open to connecting with the school staff, it's making us aware of what's going on, so that we are able to notice if there's changes in the behavior of the student, or if the student maybe down the line might need additional support. We're already aware of that situation, like that we are able to provide it, as well as like if the family say connects with me as a school counselor and they're not interested in services right now, I can still provide them with other resources, either within the community, like of different agencies, or maybe a pamphlet with information of like how to support your child at home when there is a divorce going on. So it's key just in having that connection of sharing resources, preventing situations happening, such as like a drop in grades or maybe conflict with peers, things like that. So more like a preventative measure.
Okay, our second to last question is, why is it so hard for some kids to talk about their feelings, and Oh, I feel like you kind of answered this already, but how do you get them to open up?
There's many factors when it comes to talking about our feelings. Some of the things that I wrote down is like the negative stigma that's connected to mental health, as well as the lack of emotional awareness. So if they're not able to really understand what they're feeling or how to cope with those emotions, as well as other things such as like the fear of getting judged. If they talk to someone about what's going on, either judging the student itself or like the family in general, or even past experiences. I've had students sometimes like be referred my way and they haven't had positive experiences with other therapists. So there's multiple factors that come into play. But I would say just the biggest factor, at least here as a school counselor, is really being mindful of what's going on within the student's life and really trying to connect with that student to see how that student can trust me and be open to services. And if the student is not open to services, like I mentioned before, it's absolutely okay. But it's them understanding like there's other resources available, there's services at middle school, at high school, or outside agencies that can provide that support. But it's just actively listening or just making that connection so that the students can really feel like, hey, this person really cares for me and really wants to provide the support.
Alright, and then for the last part, we wanted to bring up 3 problems and just wanted to know like your solution.
Yeah. The first problem would be that children don't feel safe at home due to their parents yelling at each other. So they feel confused, scared, or angry as they go through the changes in their family situation, and they blame themselves for it. Our solution was open and honest communication with the children can help them assume that the divorce is not their fault and that both parents love them. Do you want me to give you all 3 problems first and then get your input on it, or do you want me to go one by one?
We can go one by one just in case
Okay.
if you guys want to take notes or let's see. I would say you guys are on the right track. I would also include how students are able to as well communicate to their parents using their words what this is making them feel, experiencing like the yelling or the frustration and yelling that's happening at home. So that's one of the areas that we also support students at the early elementary age. So it's using I statements. I feel scared when there's yelling at home. It really makes me feel uncomfortable. So that awareness and that ability for the students to communicate with their parents allows the parent to really be mindful of what their child is experiencing, as well as if this is going on at home, it's also very important for the students to have other adults that they trust, where they're able to share this information, where then there can be different avenues to provide the support for the student. Like for example, if it's disclosed during counseling, if there's enough information, say to maybe like there's enough information to maybe report the family to like Child Protective Services, then that's where like a report will be made as mandated reporters to ensure that the student is safe at home and that the parents are provided with the resources needed, either parent workshops or training or different interventions so that they can get the support that they need.
Okay.
And then you mentioned that the routines is an important part to have in elementary. What would be your solution if their routine is being like altered frequently, or if there are different financial situations that can create feelings of insecurity and the children feel unsettled?
So, sorry to add on, but to add on, the solution that we had for that problem was to maintain as much consistency as possible in routines such as meal times, school schedules, and extracurricular activities, and that parents should collaborate to create a co-parenting plan. Do you think that's accurate? Is there anything that we should add on to that?
So it is accurate. So when it comes to the routine, parents really play a big role. So them being able to co-parent and put aside whatever differences they might have and really come down to a consensus of what it is that the schedule is going to look like, so that there's that consistency. Like, say for example, if the student's going to go to dad's house like on the weekends, like keeping it consistent, as well as like during the week if the student's going over with mom. So it's really allowing them to, again, like have that communication, sticking to that plan. If after like a month or two things don't work out, then that's when they, again, both parents can sit down, talk again about the plan, but also involve in the conversation like the child to see what are changes that have to be needed, if something's working out or not working out, but so that they can essentially work as a team and there can be that consistency.
Okay.
But yeah, consistency is key.
So our last problem was the relationship between the child and or both parents can be affected. The child may feel pressure to take sides unless time with one parent can cause strain. Our solution for that was to keep positive relationships with both parents, avoid putting the child in the middle of conflicts, and don't ever use a child as a messenger or involve them in the problems like that are happening between parents. What would your solution be?
So I would agree. So again, going back to like the other response is both parents really working well with each other to co-parent as well when it comes to the positive relationship within themselves is very key, especially because if a child feels like, oh, I have to go with the decision that dad says or mom, like I'm in between, it's making parents mindful of it's already difficult as it is for the child to be in this situation, so it's best for conversations that are more like adult related, where like say there's a differences in opinion to happen more like privately, where the child is not in the same room, so that a child doesn't hear all of this information that might impact him siding with one parent rather than like with the other parent, as well as being mindful of like the comments that are made. Say like if the child is with dad and then the dad is talking very negative about mom, then that's information that is going back with the child back to mom, and then it's a back and forth. So it's just being respectful of each other, keeping that positive communication. If there is an issue that's going on, it's again just problem solving through that separately from the child, so that the child doesn't find themselves in that middle ground where then they feel like, oh, I have to make a decision of mom or dad.
So based on, sorry, can you say something? Based on your personal experience here, like would you say you've experienced a lot of children who have like the problem of divorce at home? And if so, like in every 10 students, like what would you say the ratio is of like 2 and 10 do face these situations at home, or like 1?
So I've been here at Gonzales for about 6 years. I would say services that I've provided, like when it comes to like a scale of 1 to 10, like how many students are impacted, I would say maybe 3 to 4 students out of 10 are impacted. We typically see it again, like it can happen at any given time. I am seeing more of a trend happening at the very early age, so like more like kinder or first grade, but that's typically like say if there's marriages that are going for like the 5-year mark or 6 years together, then that's usually when, typically from what I've seen in my experience, that it happens very early on. So again, like because it happens very early on, like just think about it like a student is in kinder, so there's a lot of confusion. The students are used to seeing both of their parents at home, both mom and dad, so there's a lot of questions, there's changes in routine, so that's where developmentally like they're still developing all of these different skills, different emotions, how to cope with it. So oftentimes because they are very young, they're not able to verbalize what it is that they are feeling. So oftentimes we do see it through behavior, and that can be like a severe temper outburst or more conflicts here at school where say they're hating students or doing other behaviors. So that's where we see it more through like the behavior.
I think that wraps up the interview. So the questions we have for you. Do you have any for us, or?
Well, I did have a question. What interested both of you to explore divorce or like mental health within elementary?
Yeah, so in Avid they gave us basically like a list of ideas that we were pretty lost on what we wanted to do, but we're going through the list and it just like interests us the most. It was really interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Did you study psychology in college?
I actually studied social work.
Oh, social work?
So there's many different paths that you can take when you're working with mental health. I went the social work route just because with social work it's a little more broad and you're able to do more things with that degree. Like there is school social workers that provide counseling support. We also see it in our hospitals where there's in the emergency department providing support to families, or in hospice with adults that have a very severe illness that are terminally ill. So there's just many different directions, or if you would like to work for child protective services or adult protective services. So it's a little more broad. You can do a little bit of different things. Like here, for example, I provide individual counseling to students, group counseling, as well as other different interventions where I go into the classrooms and do different lessons. Like this month we are focusing on friendships and healthy friendships. So I go into the classroom and talk to the students about what it means to be a friend, things to look out for in a healthy friendship, or like things to look out for like in an unhealthy friendship, such as a lot of conflicts, not being kind to one another, and ways to problem solve through those situations. So that's what I like about more like the social work, that I get to do a little bit of everything. Through psychology, it is also very similar, but there's just differences in how to use your psychology degree. In the educational setting, it's usually used by our psychologists that are supporting our students within an IEP, so an individualized educational plan for our special day class students, if they're under like special needs.
So would you say you enjoy your job for the most part?
I do. I love what I do. I'm a first generation student, so I was the first in my family to go to college.
Congrats.
So thank you. So for me, it's exciting to be able to do something that I love and I enjoy, especially connecting with the students. Because growing up, I didn't have that connection. So it's awesome being that connection to another student and letting them know like, hey, like there's support for you guys. There's different resources, and even though they leave here, then they move on to middle school and high school, where then they're able to get those opportunities there too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.